Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm Clay Jenkinson. David Swenson is taking a break. I sat down the other day for a conversation with my dear friend Pat Brodowski, formerly the head gardener at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. We had a wonderful and spirited conversation. Let's pick it up from there. We're talking with Pat Brodowski, the former head gardener at Monticello, who knows so much
Totally
about
off track already.
Oh no, well, of course, but so I've been meaning to ask you. So I was in Somerset in England, the south of England, and I was at a place where John Steinbeck spent 7 months, and they had some apples on the ground. So I brought back a couple of those apples,
Oh, yeah.
and I pulled the seeds. All right, so far so good. Now, how do I produce an apple tree from that?
So the problem here is, you know this, the genetics of the apple seed are all different. So every apple seed that sprouts for you is going to be a different apple. It's not going to be the one that fell off the tree.
Why?
It's because that's the way it is. And so like Johnny Appleseed, he collected all the apple seeds from the cideries and brought them out on the Ohio River, and was propagating apples. And because every homesteader had to have 50 apple trees to mark his territory, so he had to mark it, established. So that's why we have so many different varieties of apples available. And then you just have to see in like 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7 years, when it finally gives a fruit, if you really like that fruit or not.
All right, so let's say I go to the grocery store today, or a greenhouse, and I buy a Honey Crisp, and I buy a Golden Delicious, and I buy the one that's covered with the green cover. What's that called?
Granny Smith.
Granny Smith. All right, and I pull the seeds out of them, then I keep them separate, and I do a kind of a scientific experiment worthy of Mr. Jefferson, and I plant, the Granny Smith seeds are in one plot, and the Honey Crisp in another, and the Golden Delicious in the third. You're saying there is no way of knowing what apple tree grows from these.
That's right. And then from the Honey Crisp, which is a hybrid, and it's been selected and hybridized and intentionally manipulated, you don't know what you're going to get.
So how do they propagate millions of Honey Crisp apples?
You take a scion, you take the branch itself. It's cloning, basically. You take the branch and you graft it. And so a lot of times seeds, like Jefferson was growing seeds of everything, you get your rootstock that way. So, and you have it live through the winter and it's hardy, and this one's going to survive, then you graft to that.
So the Somerset apple, I don't know what it was. You probably could have identified it, but I should have taken pictures of it. But assuming that I can make it grow at all, come back to that. You're saying, who knows what's going to grow?
Exactly.
It will be an apple.
You should have taken a twig. You would have had far better success.
So why, from an evolutionary standpoint, why did the apples do this to themselves?
Well, I don't know.
A pig produces a pig, and a horse produces a horse, and they don't.
Well,
they're not all over the map.
There's anomalies in every natural thing. I mean, we are just so commercially oriented that we have to have everything the same. I mean, in the heirloom world, you're enjoying the diversity,
But can't I just be happy when my apple grows, whatever it is?
You can be very happy. Will it have fruit? That's one question. Will it, flower? Also, you have to have a pollinating species nearby, like a crab apple or something. And it has to be blooming at the same time your apple blooms. So that
my neighbors have a huge apple tree that produces like 3,000 apples every couple of years. So I should be okay. But all right, so in a very practical way, Pat Brodowski, now that I have my seeds, how do I actually grow them?
Yeah, I think I looked this up once you were asked, but I think you have to like maybe scarify them, like put them in the fridge for a couple of months and then put them in soil at a certain temperature. And like all of this great stuff is available. And maybe in your climate, since you're going to put it outside anyway, maybe you would want to plant them outdoors and see what happens.
What is scarify?
That's when you have to imitate the natural forces on the seed, whether it's acid or it's, manure or something, and like hot, cold, certain temperatures for certain lengths of time, and it imitates the natural environment. And I think apples originated in China or somewhere, so they're used to northern climates, and maybe you'd have good luck in North Dakota. You have to dig through the snow at this point, right?
I'm going to put them in the refrigerator. and then I'm going to see what happens in the spring. All right. So here's my question about Johnny Appleseed. I read in Michael
Pollen
book that Johnny Appleseed was doing two things. He was propagating the apple, which was a great source of sugar at a time when sugar was hard to get, but he was also propagating Applejack. He was creating the conditions under which.
Well, so the apple is like the pioneer fruit of all trades. You have, whether you can eat it or not, that's like totally secondary, tertiary. So the apple, you can make vinegar from that, and then you can clean anything with vinegar, glass and newspaper and vinegar. You can clean all kinds of, you can use it instead of vitamin C or lemon juice. I used to make vinegar pie.
No.
Say, Mom, no, not the vinegar pie.
What's vinegar pie? Well, who would want a vinegar pie, Pat?
I should send you one. Everybody, but because it tastes like lemon custard or vanilla custard. It's just that acidification that you put with the cream custard, and you swear it's, I also made sauerkraut pie. So the next time we meet, I'll give you a choice.
When you go to a good wine shop and they bring you a flight, you can like pour a
flight of pies.
This is a special edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. We're going to take just a quick break here. When we come back, I want to ask you how you became Pat Brodowski. And I know that's a long story, but I want you to give like a 2-minute thing of how you became this person that I know that can talk about vinegar pie. And I'll never forget the time when we were driving from Charlottesville to the Outer Banks together for an evening that I was going to do there, and you were telling me about indigo and the need for urine as a processing chemical for indigo. I almost flipped the car. So we'll be back in just a moment. We're talking to the great and my dear friend Pat Brodowski. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to this special edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm talking to my friend Pat Brodowski. She's already been regaling me with begonias and elephant ears and so on and so on. Pat, I met you as the chief gardener at Monticello. Give us all just the quickest autobiography of how you became that person.
So I was born in the Hudson Valley, New York, and my parents had gardens. My mother was quite a gardener, and I was in the 4-H. One of these star people in the 4-H, went on all the trips and everything. And I just really, really loved plants and horticulture. And I think when I was in 4th grade, I started investigating foraging for plants. And I had a science fair project in which I had all these edible plants. And then I had a mushroom stand along the road selling wild mushrooms when I was like 5th grade. And then in 6th grade to 7th grade, I went through the World Book Encyclopedia, which is the only source book we had, and copied out every economic plant there was in the encyclopedia, and decided I wanted to find all of them.
What do you mean an economic plant?
Anything with a functional use, like edible, make wood structures, make basketry, anything that would be functional for humans. And I had read somewhere that the Chinese felt that every plant on the earth had a use for mankind.
So back to the World Book. We all had the World Book.
Yeah.
You had to be rich to get the Britannica, and most of us had the World Book instead. And they were fascinating with their
tiny volumes,
pesticide overlays, and so on. So let me get this straight. At a young age, you went through it in its entirety, looking
and I typed it all out. I typed it all out.
And you typed it all out.
Yeah.
Because you still have that document?
My uncle worked for IBM, and we had kind of like experimental typewriters in the house. So I learned to type when I was, 4th grade, 5th grade. So I typed the whole thing out, and then I would have, each one was on a different page, and I decided I'm going to find them, which was really hard to do because I had very few guidebooks, and then try them all out and figure out a recipe. And so I could find that somewhere. I don't know.
You have that document?
I do. Not with me, but yeah.
How long is that document?
Oh, good question. I don't know. It's, like that.
One plant per page?
Mm-hmm.
Typed out verbatim from World Book.
Or I might have added things in, because I remember using a lot of different books that I could, so.
Did you bind it in some way?
A shoestring.
And then when you found the plant, would you
add to it?
A leaf or something?
Yeah, it'll be a good project to go back and see.
You should digitize this thing. How old were you when you did this?
I can show you a book I did write.
Yes.
Look, it's about dye plants. Did I send you a copy of this?
I have this book. This is your dye
Yes.
plant book.
My dye plant book. Yeah. So I finally got around to writing everything I wanted to know about plants that make dyes. And now I'm working on plants that make paint.
What year were you during the World Book Nerd Out?
Sixth grade, I was about 12.
All right, so pick it up from there. You're now 12. You're already deep in.
Yeah. And then I just, I really wanted to be a shaker at one time, and I studied the shakers because they used all kinds of plants. I got some kind of shaker book and copied everything out that they were using. I remember doing that like in junior high, something like that. And then I just had different kinds of gardens at my house. And then I went to college for horticulture.
Where was this? Where did you go to college?
I wanted to go to Cornell University, and that was my goal in life. And I think my parents did not want that to happen. And so I went to this 2-year college in Morrisville, New York, where I've met great people and I still know people from there. And I did horticulture, and then I transferred to Cornell and got a degree in agriculture. And I also took like art courses at the same time. And then you could sit in on any lecture you wanted to see. So I sat in on underwater archaeology, all kinds of scientific studies. I worked in the hotel school then for a year after I graduated, because I wanted to learn to cook. So I was working in the kitchens, kind of like hands-on. I saw Yo-Yo Ma practice his cello. I mean, I saw some amazing things.
You were there when Carl Sagan was at Cornell.
Oh yeah, Carl Sagan. I served him lunch. Yeah, he was.
I met him in the White House, so we have this connection, and he was absolutely amazing to talk with.
Wonderful speaker.
And gracious and generous.
Yes, really, really lovely man. And he always wanted gravy. Did he have gravy on his food? Because I served the lunch, the lunch counter. And he'd always come in last. They would be saving this sort of sloppy stew for him. Say, that's Carl's, and or the doctor, however they called him. And then we just have to dish this glop up for him to eat.
And did you ever pose a question to him or get into a conversation?
No, but I knew one of his assistants, or maybe it was his wife, she was from Venezuela, and they're working on that copper disc, and her voice is on it. And so we used to talk about, well, do I remember anything verbatim? No, but yeah,
wait, we're deep in the weeds here, but just quickly, for those who don't remember, what was the copper disc?
It was all the voices in the world, and it was put on, I think, the Jupiter. That's what they were working on. And then they launched it, I think, and is it still going? It's still out there? So they were hoping to find somebody who could possibly read this disc. I hope they put the device, I don't know, push button or whatever, I don't know. But
there were mathematical formulae and some drawings and music from different eras and chants and languages. And
yeah, it's awesome. Just, a reach out communication, like, are you out there? We want to talk to you in whatever language we have acquired, or invented.
Pat, when we think about what's best about humanity, and this is a time when we're pretty disillusioned, but when you think about what's best, I think of someone like Carl Sagan and sending out that disc and saying, we are this extraordinary species on this extraordinary planet, and we just are reaching out in friendship to see if somebody will receive this message and respond. Don't you just love that part of life?
Yeah, it's almost like sending out a runic tablet, or the Rosetta Stone or something, and who knows if they can ever return, interpret it and return it. So it was just awesome. It was the Star Trek era. Star Trek was originated near where I grew up too. Gene Roddenberry was kind of a local in another town, and
now you're out of college, and you've been working at this hotel service.
I worked at the hotel, and then I went to art school. Then I applied to art school because I wanted to do botanical illustrations, draw plants. That was the kind of a goal. And I got accepted all kinds of art schools, but Maryland Institute seemed the warmest location and kind of like friendly and kind of low key. So I went there, and I worked in restaurants while I went to art school so I could pay my way through. And so, because I paid my way through college, which is really difficult to do. I was a toll booth operator while I was at Cornell, and I used to work double shifts and stuff. So anyway, I went to art school, and I almost got a second bachelor's degree because I wasn't really getting very good advice from anyone. And I'm 7 credits short from a bachelor's in fine art. But and when I got there, I did printmaking. The illustration department, it was more about commercials, making ads and drawing people. I really want to do plants, so I started printmaking, and then I got into painting, and I really loved that.
You're painting again now, but Pat, let me ask you this kind of more conceptual question. So you're a very smart woman. You read books. You, like the rest of us, you apprehend the world through the printed page. That's where I live. That's my zone. But for you, somehow your mind or your consciousness has always wanted to play it out through your hands. Why?
Great question. I don't know. I really love how the ingenuity of people, and I don't really dwell on like mathematical things, but it has to be visual, real visual. I'm, I guess, a visual learner, and not necessarily much of an audio learner either, because I don't do audiobooks. I start thinking about my own things. I just can't pay attention. So I guess I'm a visual learner.
But your hands, I mean, you do just count off on like your 10 finger stuff you can do. I'll start. You can grow plants. You can.
Well, I'm painting now a lot.
All right. You can paint.
I do textiles, like weaving, spinning. I'm spinning
including chemical dyeing of those textiles from organic dye.
Yarn right now, making a blanket.
Okay. You can sew.
See.
I know you can sew.
Oh yeah, sewing. I used to make all my own clothes.
Right.
I cook, and now I'm into grains. I've got a grain mill to make my own grain. I wanted to make this is interesting. Henley's book of all things, or book of processes. I sent you a copy of that. But Henley's was a book my mom had from her dad. Her dad was an ornamental plaster worker and did ceilings and things. And he had this great book, or maybe I found it in a yard sale. But anyway, it was how to make everything. And so I wanted to know how everything developed from the elemental things. I wanted to make my own toothpaste. Like in 7th grade, I went to my English teacher and I had this crazy word. I wanted to know what, I think, levigation, what did that mean? Because I couldn't find it. We didn't have any resources. And so, it means grinding something really, really, I had to have levigated cuttlefish bone for my toothpaste.
We're not done with our list. You're a carpenter, you can build.
Yeah, I build things. Not very well. My daughter is far better than I am at that. Yeah, but I do build things.
And you don't have a chemical set in your house somewhere. You don't do chemistry experiments, do you?
Well, yeah, actually, with the dyes, it is to precipitate the dye molecules out of solution. You use certain kind of chemicals. Not that I'm writing I was trying to write out the reaction, but I can't do that. I used to do chemistry, but not.
But you not only can make food and find food, but you process food too. How do you preserve food?
Drying and freezing. The canning thing. Well, I can can, but it's a lot of work. And I'm in Virginia. You don't have to. I can walk outside and pick something today.
You have a long growing season in Virginia.
Yes.
Where are you now? Where do you live now?
Standardsville, which is near Skyline Drive. Really nice section of Virginia. It's on the Blue Ridge. We have mountain views. It's just extraordinary. Yeah. So.
All right. So we haven't covered all of your skill set. I don't know if you can strip an engine and
play music. Play music. Is that count? Piano?
Don't you also make musical instruments?
Yeah, I made some flutes. Yes, I've
And you play the violin too, I think.
Violin, yeah, and I played the clarinet in the band. And then when I was in college and all that, I played bass clarinet and the cymbals and whatever came by, alto sax or something. I mean, just all, once you're into the reed instruments, they're all the same. And I have a flute, and then I have the Native American flute, which is really cool. I took a class from Native Americans, and to make that. So yeah.
So get us to Monticello. How did you wind up at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello?
Isn't that wonderful? So, of course, I went off and had kids. Well, I worked at an art thing, and I came back, and I worked at I was a technical writer. Can you believe it? Writing computer manuals. And then I got, we had kids. I needed a job. I started working as a writer for the newspaper. And then I was teaching art, our assistant art teacher at McDonough School for pre-K through fourth, and we had a little wood shop, and we had all these cool classes. The kids were great, and the school said everybody had to have a master's degree to teach here. So I said, I don't have a master's degree, but I work here. Can you pay my tuition? They said, well, you're part-time. You're only working 35 hours a week, so we can pay half. So then I went to college for art teacher education. And they get to the point where you have to be teaching in class. You have to quit your job to teach all day, and you have to pay tuition to teach, and nobody's paying you back. And I thought, well, it's a double negative. How can I can't possibly do this. And I'm freaking out. And I lay out newspapers on the table for the kids that are coming in for the next class. And there's this ad for a local museum, historian educator. And so I applied for the job and I got it. And it was like, and then I quit the college, quit the school, I mean, it's just like total turnaround in October, and started being this museum educator, which was fantastic because we had traditional arts of all kinds. So I learned how to do all of those so I could teach other people how to interpret for the public. And then we got to design all of those exhibits. And so I did that for 8 years. We had 15 buildings of basically Victorian agricultural equipment. It was fantastic because everything is visual, you know, you can see the gears, you can see how things work. It's really easy to explain, and you just understand how ingenuity, you know, was just rampant in the Victorian era. It was great. But there was a lot to it, and we had monthly events, and I had 30 gardeners doing this little tiny heirloom garden. We planted plants from 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, research all kinds of stuff. It was great. You can make any job into what you want it to be, you know. So I learned a ton, and I thought, you know, I would really like to work someplace that is actually a functioning museum, because it was kind of a, you know, there was some elements to it that we should not discuss. So I had a friend who was a writer for the New York Times, Ann Raver. She was the garden writer. We used to get together and she used to write. So I was in the Times a couple times with my little group. And then she said, she interviewed Peter Hatch, and he's looking for a vegetable gardener.
He was, of course, the longtime
Director
gardener at Monticello.
Yes. And so, you know, I contacted him and say I wanted to, and so when the job came up, it was listed online. You know, I just applied for it, and then I got the job. So
what year was that, Pat?
Cool. What when
year
was it? 2009.
2009, you're doing this museum work, and you see, you're networking, you hear about a job at Monticello.
Job of a lifetime. Just an incredible job. Yes.
2009 to 2000, what was your time at Monticello?
2020. Yeah. So
11 years, 12 years.
Yeah, because I started in May. I was in a master's degree program back in Westminster, Maryland, and I had finished all the coursework, and I just needed to write the thesis part. And so I had to stay until May into my last class, and then I could start working at Monticello. So when I got there, I still was writing a paper for philosophy, which is horrible. And then I had, I think they gave me 5 to 7 years or something to finish a paper. And so I ended up writing about Jefferson's herbs and salad greens, which is really great. And everything that Jefferson could have known if he had looked for it.
All right, so you're fine. We finally got you to Monticello. So what did you know about Jefferson before you went to Monticello?
Oh, not very much, to tell you the truth. I was in a very provincial place, let's say. And when I explained that I was going to Monticello, I had a nickel in my pocket because nobody could actually place where that was or who that was. So
Nickel has, of course, the image of the house.
Monticello on one side and Jefferson on the other. And say, this guy. And somebody would say to me, oh yeah, we went down to see the Walton Museum, but they weren't interested. So yeah, it was really cool. And so what's great about Monticello is they have so many lectures at the library, and also for all their guides. They have a beautiful guide program. So being the gardener, I mean, you don't usually go through the guide program, but I went to every lecture I could get to. And just because in the garden, you're one-on-one with everybody that comes through with a question, because it's not like the guide is busy, I'm just there pulling weeds. I'm really busy, but I would talk to everybody. So I wanted to know as much as I could know and really understand Jefferson's, everything that surrounded him, all these little, everything he was doing or knew or whatever. So.
Right. So how long is that garden terrace?
1,000 feet.
And it
And
was it
three
was
levels.
it was made by enslaved labor.
Yes.
And so when you're there, you're certainly well aware of how race has sort of come up and enveloped the question of Thomas Jefferson in our time. When you're out there and you have some interns and some paid staff and some equipment, and you're trying to take care of this immense garden, and you sort of stop to realize from time to time how much hard physical work it must have taken for those enslaved people to build this immense garden.
So we used to talk about Wormley Hughes, who was Jefferson's favorite gardener, perhaps. And I used to tell people I'm trying to keep up with Wormley because he must have been a fantastic guy. I'm just trying to keep up with Wormley Hughes. I'm an old lady. So the other aspect to this is Mulberry Row is right above the garden. And in Jefferson's day, there would have been a fence. So the whatever's happening in the garden was kind of like off site, off view from everyone else. But today, because the view is so beautiful, they leave that fence down. And all the visitors in the beginning, before they changed the tour to be more human-centered, the slave stories, slaves have names, this is what they were about. Before they changed that, the visitors would come off the terrace having talked about slavery, and they'd come down and ask if I was the slave.
No.
Yes, undoubtedly. And so either we would try to be away from the people, or we just have to point blank answer it. And a lot of times people had never thought about the whole slavery story before they got there. And they thought it was a joke. And they say, oh, well, you must be the slave. And I say, some people think that's a joke, but and then I would kind of like lay out the whole story about life. There are different ranks of slaves, which is really interesting. We have these wonderful people from Williamsburg who come and interpret basketry and cooking and stories. And they were so instrumental in teaching about the levels of occupation in a slave society. And then you realize that these people had been there for generations and they was locked in. This is their home. And even the other presidential homes in this area, the slaves did not go far when slavery was ended, and they still have little villages and stuff. So it's not just something you just kick around. It's not a pet. It's like this functioning culture that was there, and Jefferson was using it, yes, but I think he also appreciated a number of aspects of it.
Of course. So we're talking to Pat Brodowski. We need to take a short break. We're listening to a special edition of Listening to America, also known as the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Pat, when we come back, I want to remind you of the time I came to the Harvest Festival, and we'll talk about the competition between us on that occasion. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the special edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm Clay Jenkinson. David Swenson is on break. I have the great joy of spending the whole hour with my dear friend, Pat Brodowski. Pat, I was invited, thanks, I think, mostly to you, to come to the Harvest Festival, which happens every fall at Monticello. And you and I had been going back and forth for several years about gardens, and you had exchanged some Monticello seeds, and I had gotten you some Native American seeds from North Dakota, which you were successfully growing. And so I said I was going to bring a little of my harvest in a suitcase for our little harvest meal. And I did. And I had these like pathetic little
miniature that miniature squash. I'll never forget it. It looked like a gourd. And then ours are like 37 pounds. We actually brought them around on the golf cart and had people bet on how much did it weigh. It was so extraordinary. And you said, oh, I see where this is going.
And so, even after all these years, you're still gloating about it. I'm really proud to see that. I did my best. I brought the stuff, and then it was just like miniature food.
Well, see, the thing is, Jefferson is growing crops in the South that are from the South, and we sent them to you. So it's the wrong climate. You would have had to start them in a greenhouse way early and then put them out for the 2 hours of sunshine you get in the summer. So,
well, I mean, it's very kind of you to say that. But then after that, we had a little harvest meal. And I'll never forget this because I had several of my friends there, and we walked down part of the terrace, and at each spot you pluck a piece of a tomato or two, and maybe a squash or whatever. and just kind of casually talking to us and showing us stuff, but assembling food in a basket. And then you made us a salad at a picnic table, and it was like the freshest food I ever ate in my life.
Yes. Can you imagine Jefferson had that every day? He had that fresh food every day and picked and massaged and hit. And then, Martha said, you have to pick their lettuces in the dew in the morning, and lay them out. And of course, he has ice house, so he can keep everything cold. And then we made that salad dressing that is really brilliant. It uses the boiled egg, and you mash that into water, so it's like a cream, and then had tarragon in it, tarragon vinegar. It was just, incredible.
Have a soft or hard-boiled egg, or just a raw egg?
Hard-boiled egg.
Hard-boiled, and then you mash it up until it becomes a slurry.
Mash it up, the yolk, with I think 2 tablespoons of water or vinegar, and then you have the tarragon vinegar, and you have equal parts of mustard and sugar, and then there's oil, and it's the best dressing ever. And it's in the book, in the cookbook, how to dress salad. And they talked about all the different herbs. So I used to use cookbooks a lot to determine what Jefferson was growing and why, and then also his garden plan of, I think, 1809, and he has them all regulated, almost like a grocery store, all the root vegetables in one spot and all those salads, and he has dressed salads and cooked salads.
He was nothing if not organized.
Yes.
So, Pat, I want to read you this letter, which I'm sure is the most frequently cited of all Jefferson documents per the garden. You know it as well as anyone. It's his letter to Charles Wilson Peel, in which he says, "I have often thought that if heaven had given me the choice of my position and calling, it should have been on a rich spot of earth, well watered, and near a good market for the productions of the garden. No occupation is so delightful to me as the culture of the earth, and no culture comparable to that of the garden. Such a variety of subjects, someone always coming to perfection, the failure of one thing repaired by the success of another, and instead of one harvest, a continued one through the year, under a total want of demand except for our family table. I am still devoted to the garden, but though an old man, I am but a young gardener." Doesn't get any better than that, does it?
So and I'm sure he appreciated how much change. There's always something new in the garden, whether it's something sprouting or something was destroyed or something you have to correct on. I always thought horticulture is problem solving, because you always see something new and and it's just invigorating for creative thought. It's great. So
what did you learn from Thomas Jefferson during your 12 years at, what did you learn about him by being hands-on in a garden?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the desire for all the plant diversity, just knowing how many different plants there are, and how he wanted to grow everything he could find, and I really thought that was amazing. And the endless quest for new varieties. And it gets to be like a collector's passion, So I would scope through all kinds of garden catalogs trying to find things. And then every winter I'd research one variety, one plant, like one radishes one year, muskmelons one year, peas, just to kind of figure out where these varieties are that he might have had, because they all changed names, the commercial availability. And so I would just research stuff and things that we wanted to grow and couldn't figure out if he had them or not, like kohlrabi, which he did actually have. He just called it something else. So that endless quest is and it really catches on. I think until then, I used to grow things that were fun and had a story, but not to that extent, So we ended up with about 250 different vegetables, and then 47 herbs, of course. And then we had economic plants and plants of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So in fact, that's why you sent me those corns. That was fantastic. We actually had our visitors plant those seeds. You gave me 15 beans, and I remember thinking, our rows are 42 feet long. These beans have got to really stretch. So we planted them between the corn, and they were fantastic beans. And so that was a wonderful story to tell people. There was a legend about one seed feeding 12 people, although it wasn't about beans. It was still, that Hidatsa red bean, 120 pods on one plant. It was just unbelievable. And it was very fast. And
I- that's that's one of my favorite of all concepts. I call it the Robinson Crusoe concept. And you remember in that great novel, he finds a little canvas bag, and he's going to use it for something else. And he tries to empty out what appears to be dust or something in it, and walks away. And then suddenly oats sprout, and he realizes, oh my goodness, I'm now a farmer. And then so the first year he's just like paranoid that something's going to happen to that little plot, and he harvests it, and then he saves most of the seed and puts it in 3 or 4 different places with different humidities and so on. And then the next year he plants more, and within a few years he has a giant abundance of oats.
He had stick fence around it, I think. Didn't he have like marauding animals? And he went
Right.
through the whole thing, where you have to protect it once you've started it. Yeah. So
That's the miracle, right? I mean, that you put a seed in the ground and you get this proliferation of seeds.
Yeah. Don't you wish they had put seeds on that Jupiter disk that went out to space?
Suddenly, Jupiter's exfoliated. So, but I mean, in the Bible, this is the parable of the mustard seed. That faith is like a mustard seed. It's almost too small to touch, and you put it in the ground, it produces this giant bush. And Jesus says that's what faith is. It can start with that tiny little seed. And when you think of the different types of seeds, their size, their shape, but they're all small. What's the largest seed you ever grew? It's a pumpkin seed or something like that, right?
Sunflower, something like that. Yeah.
Or I suppose a walnut is a seed, right?
A lot of nuts are very large, like Kentucky coffee. And well, this is an interesting side note, but a lot of those large seeded plants were for the prehistoric creatures to eat. So we used to talk about this a lot. We had Kentucky coffee trees sending their seeds down into the garden, and they would sprout, and the roots go like 3 or 4 feet. And that really was food for the mastodon. So which Jefferson wanted to have a mastodon.
He wanted a mastodon.
He wanted a mastodon. He wanted Lewis and Clark to bring it back. Remember?
So now you're retired, but of course, all that means is you're not employed in that way.
Right. Yeah. So now instead of like commuting and working, and I have 12 hours more each day to do stuff. So it's fantastic.
And what's an art or a craft that you have not yet done that you really want to try?
So I really, you know what? I'll show you this. I really do want to do like fancy wood carving like this.
Who did that?
I bought this in an antique shop.
But isn't that wonderful? What is it? It's kind of a leaf.
Like a leaf motif out of wood, and somebody's used, grooved chisels to cut out this 3D texture. It's one-sided. So it's
what kind of wood is that?
It could be oak.
Pretty dark.
Well, it's been stained to be dark,
right.
But it's like leaf forms. I really want to do some leaf forms, and I need to build some gates for my new fence around my berry patch. So I do a lot of twig weaving, so I want to make some authentic things. I want to play the cello. I have never played the cello. So
one of these days.
No, I don't. No.
Well, that's easily obtained.
I guess easily. You just have to order one and get it or something. So yeah, I love the sound of the cello.
The cello is, I think, my favorite orchestra instrument. When the cello is played by someone like, and you say you met Yo-Yo Ma, but when it's played beautifully, it's the most hauntingly beautiful sound, I think, in an orchestra.
Yeah, it's that resonant, that deep resonance. So I have the violin, which is kind of like cranky, but the cello is really, really it. And I'm going to weave a blanket. I have never done that. I don't know if that counts.
That counts.
And I want to breed some iris varieties. So I've got some irises here. Did you know that there was a guy, Kelly Norris, who bred a new variety of iris using a wild flag iris and I think the blackberry lily came up with a new species of iris because they're all in the iris family. So that's totally cool,
No, I missed those major headlines in the New York Times. You are a genuinely eccentric and magnificent person. I've never known anyone like you, because I know some people that have skills, but you have so many, and you're so curious in so many directions. And I've told you before, that when I was in college, I used to see on the shelves these Foxfire books of how to build a
Oh,
fire, how to build a cabinet, how to, how to create a kiln. And it's like you wrote them because you have so many skills. If you had to bake a brick, could you?
make a brick?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Sure.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to dig clay. I used to dig my own clay and made my own pots, and then I made a kiln, and then fired them up. They weren't hot enough. They all melted eventually, but yeah, I don't know all that. I really wanted to know the the elemental, the origins of all these things that people use. And I probably should have been an archaeologist. That would have been fun. But just wanted to make everything from absolute scratch. You know.
Do you
So
believe that
now,
we only get one shot at life, that once I die, it's over?
that's really fascinating. I've been watching, YouTube videos of children who wake up and they think they are, an airplane pilot, or, we're on a wagon train or something. So I don't know if we're connected to people in the past or not, but it sounds like a very likely thing. How else would you have a certain inclination unless you were sort of led to it from somewhere else? How do you find a genius in the middle of, um, suburbia? How come it lands there? Or how, in the middle of homeless shelter or something, you have a genius. How come it happens? And then I thought, well, why do they, then if you're going to be reincarnated, why do they pick that person? So I was like, I don't know. It's just so random. I don't know what I really believe exactly.
Me either. So, and Jefferson, of course, as you know, was off and on again about heaven. And he basically was a materialist who believed that the soul is corpuscular, and if the soul is corpuscular and we die, that's it for the soul. But he also carried a few little nominal Christian notions of heaven.
Yeah, I don't think they ever defined the soul very well. So I don't know. I think it's something else. I think it's some kind of energy. I mean, don't I don't want to get stuck in a oh, she said this, but I think there's some kind of an energy thing that you do tap into with other people and places. I mean, how can you just sort of come up with a new idea all the time? I don't know. In philosophy, they were telling us that you can't have a new idea without having a previous experience of some kind of idea. And I spent a whole lot of time trying to figure out any time when I hadn't thought of something because of something that some precursor. And I
Very
really
John
couldn't,
Locke of you.
yeah, could not find it.
So, Pat, uh, it's so interesting to have these conversations with you. I have friends here on the Great Plains who are part of the farm to table movement and CSAs and are, niche farming or organic farming, but it's a very small phenomenon here. It's a bigger phenomenon nationally, but even then, it's largely for people of privilege. It hasn't really gained much market share. Where do you see our food intake system going in the next 100 years?
Yeah, so I don't really have a perspective on the whole US, but here there is lots of CSAs and farmers markets. You can have a farmers market pretty much every day of the week if you really look for it. And I think there's a lot of that in New York City. I mean, I guess that's affluent, but I think it depends on the climate in which you're living, whether it's somebody can actually sustain their livelihood doing that. Maybe out in North Dakota it's harder. I do know there's a lot more tunnel farming, and it's a huge movement, I think, to reclaim farms by younger people who, I think the stigma of farming is maybe getting dissolved. There's more and more young people who want to do farming, is what I feel. So I guess once you're into it, you're just surrounded by like-minded people. So
No question about that. But just kind of speculating, I go to the grocery store anywhere in America, whether it's Denver or San Francisco or Tampa, Florida, or Charlottesville for that matter. I can go to a specialty store or Whole Foods or an organic store. But typically, if you just go into a supermarket, you get your tomato and you get your lettuce and you get your cucumber and you get your mushrooms and so on. And, in my lifetime, the taste of tomatoes has plummeted until they're basically tasteless.
Right.
So
Yeah,
what does that say about a country where this kind of wealth, and we damage our fresh food supply in the way that we do and turn it into something that has lost most of its joy?
so you want me to have a tirade about greed?
Go
Because
ahead.
it's we if we actually were agrarian the way Jefferson wanted it, we wouldn't look for a tomato in the winter, for one thing, and we wouldn't have all of this great movement of all the vegetables and using resources to do it, bringing broccoli from California and letting the ice melt across the desert. That's ridiculous. And it was just shocking to learn about some of these things. If we didn't think we needed stuff due to the commercial aspect of everything that you have, or if it wasn't portrayed with a special bag and a happy smile on it, you wouldn't want it. So it's a matter of choice, and our choices are really being focused by, media, culture, and things that are available. We have been manipulated in every single way, and there's a whole lot of stuff I never buy at the store, just tons of stuff. I would never touch any packaged cereal, never. So
Pat, if I want to just say one thing about that, and I have a final question for you for today, but when I was growing up on the Great Plains, you could get raspberries for about 14 days per year. That's it. You could get strawberries for a certain window of time. You could get corn or tomatoes, and then they went off season and you couldn't get them except in a can. And here's what was so great about that. We would wait all year for the raspberries. And when they came, man, we were looking for them because they're going to be gone in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So when you have it every day of the year, maybe some of the pleasure is lost, because you have no anticipation and no pleasure in having it now. But then also, you don't want it to decay. And there's a lot more varieties now, so they have extended the season for certain things. And I've got berries out here that I can have a pretty long season, and I put them in the freezer. I don't know why we think that everybody has to have everything every minute. It's just, I don't know. It's what do you call that when somebody has to have everything all the time?
Instant gratification is one thing.
Yeah.
So Pat, I've been talking to Pat Brodowski, formerly the head gardener at Monticello, but this extraordinary sort of Renaissance woman that is one of my dearest friends. Pat, as we close, let me ask you this question. So many people will be listening to this and fascinated, but they'll think, I don't have a green thumb. I mean, she's obviously some kind of miracle worker. What could everyone who's listening to this grow in the next year? You could almost guarantee it's going to grow something that you can eat unless you neglect it.
Probably radishes. When I was a kid, I grew radishes on the windowsill in the wintertime, just in a bag of soil. So if anybody just got a bag of soil, I mean, I know it's going to have fertilizer in it, but you get some flower pot and put something in it. Sweet potatoes, right in the store, you can cut them, make a little sprouts. Sweet potato is prolific. Lettuces, really, really easy to grow. You have to choose wisely, I think. Onions, easy to grow. Garlic, get a clove of garlic, stick it in a pot, and it will multiply into a nice head of garlic. There's so many very, very easy plants. It doesn't take a lot of effort, or, you just have to pay attention to it. That's all. That's really what it is. Be attentive.
Thank you, Pat Brodowski. We've been listening to this special edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour with our dear friend, Pat Brodowski, now of rural Virginia. We'll see you next week for another important edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay S. Jenkinson. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.com and on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.com. Bach Cello Suite No. 3 in C Major by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program through the eyes of Thomas Jefferson.